By the time he was 40, Captain George Eyston had already achieved more than many men would achieve in a lifetime. Born in 1897, as a schoolboy he had raced motorcycles before studying engineering at Cambridge University. After the First World War he moved on to car racing, becoming well known for racing MGs, many of which featured the Power Plus superchargers which he himself had invented and patented. At Bonneville in late 1935 he witnessed Malcolm Campbell set a land speed record of 301 miles per hour in Bluebird. Days later, Eyston would set his own 24-hour endurance record on the salt flats at an average of 141 miles per hour in his purpose-built Challenger Speed of the Wind. George Eyston, prolific racer and record breaker, now secretly set his sights on beating Campbell's record. And this new challenge would result in a car unlike anything the land speed record had seen before. Eyston would name it Thunderbolt. In 1935, Malcolm Campbell had set his 301 miles per hour record in the final version of his Bluebird car. Its Rolls-Royce 37-litre supercharged V12 engine, originally developed for the Schneider Trophy seaplanes, produced almost 2,800 horsepower and represented the state-of-the-art in engine design at the time. Eyston would need nearly double the power to raise the record to 350 miles per hour, and so his choice was clear. He would build a car using two of the same engines. For all its power, the Rolls-Royce R engine was a heavy power unit, and mounting two in tandem, one behind the other, would have elongated the car and overstressed the chassis. The safer configuration was to mount the engines side by side behind the driver. If the engines were impressive, the real star of Thunderbolt's powertrain was the gearbox, which carried well over 5,000 horsepower from the two engines via two clutches to the three main gears and onto the rear wheels. The gearbox was 5 feet 6 inches wide, and despite the case being made from aluminium, it weighed well over a ton, which amounted to almost 1/6 of the total weight of the car. With a design speed of 380 miles per hour, the new car boasted air brakes in the tail and maintained the same open cockpit which had featured in all successful land speed record attempts up to that point. Eyston would find himself competing against John Cobb for land speed glory. Whilst Cobb's car had a closed cockpit and was both lighter and sleeker, Thunderbolt had far more power available. Although Eyston is credited with being both the car's driver and designer, his business partner Ernest Eldridge was also involved in the car's original concept. Eldridge was a former land speed record holder himself, setting a mark of 145 miles per hour in 1924 behind the wheel of his aero-engined Fiat Mephistopheles. Sadly, Eldridge did not live to see Thunderbolt completed, as he succumbed to pneumonia in late 1935. Thunderbolt was built by small motor manufacturers Beans over a period of 7 months starting in early 1937. Final assembly on the shop floor took just 6 weeks. As the car took shape, the scale of Eyston's new Challenger became apparent. Skinned in Burma Bright alloy, Thunderbolt was a massive vehicle. Measuring 30 feet 5 inches long, 3 feet 10 inches high, plus a sizable tail fin, and 7 feet 2 inches wide, the car weighed in at 7 tons. Eyston was not too concerned about the car's huge weight. In 1939 he reflected, "In order to transmit a certain horsepower, there must be a certain weight pressing down upon the driving wheels to give proper adhesion. A car as light as those developed by the recent Grand Prix formula is admittedly a marvellous piece of engineering, but for safety at over 6 miles a minute, I would rather sit inside the solid bulk of Thunderbolt." 8 wheels were used to distribute the extreme weight, 2 steerable pairs of wheels at the front with double wheels at the rear. The front axle's narrow track prevented the second pair of wheels running in ruts made by those at the front. Dual wheels at the rear were intended to reduce stress on the tyres whilst improving traction. Despite the multi-axle design, the Dunlop tyres would be at the limit of available technology and would be changed after each run. Inboard brakes built to a design patented by Eyston himself reduced the chance of heat from the brakes damaging the tyres. The Rolls-Royce R engines to be used in Thunderbolt were in short supply. Originally developed for air racing, only 19 were built. They were hugely expensive. A cost of £5,800 in 1930 equates to around £380,000 in 2020, and their scarcity led to the few that were built being reused in many different projects. Consequently, the two engines fitted to Thunderbolt had already gained considerable provenance. R-25 had been used in a supermarine seaplane to win the Schneider Air Trophy in 1931. R-27 had been used in the same aircraft 2 weeks later to gain the airspeed record at 407.5 miles per hour. Sir Malcolm Campbell loaned Eyston R-17 from Bluebird to be used as a spare. Given his background as a racer and record breaker, when the news broke that George Eyston had built a new car to beat Campbell's record, perhaps it should not have come as a surprise. And yet, Eyston had managed to keep Thunderbolt a secret from press and public alike until it was rolled out of the factory. Thunderbolt was shipped untested to Bonneville in August 1937. The weather at Bonneville during 1937 had been poor, and the salt flats were still flooded when Eyston arrived on October the 3rd. It was the end of the month before Thunderbolt could get out onto the salt, and on its very first outing, Eyston ran his giant car through the mile at 309 miles per hour, 8 miles per hour faster than Campbell's existing record. Clutch issues caused by the engines running at different speeds prevented a return run within the hour necessary to claim the record. However, Thunderbolt had shown its potential at the first opportunity. Just over a week later, on November the 6th, Thunderbolt had been fixed and this time ran slightly faster, but clutch problems continued and a return run once again proved impossible. Eyston and his crew came up with an improved design and commissioned new parts to be made by the Offenhauser Company in Los Angeles. On November the 19th, with the new parts fitted, Thunderbolt was ready to make a final push for the record before the winter weather closed in. The first run, at 305 miles per hour, put Eyston on course to take Campbell's 2-year-old record. This time the car behaved itself, but during the return run a rag left in the open cockpit blew past Eyston's face and knocked his goggles askew. At over 300 miles per hour, he drove Thunderbolt one-handed and partially blinded while he straightened his goggles, to claim a new world land speed record with an average of 311.42 miles per hour through the measured mile. As the weather closed in, Eyston returned to England to modify his record breaker for the 1938 season. He knew it could go faster. During the first half of 1938, Thunderbolt was returned to beans for significant modifications. The 3 huge leaf springs that formed the car's suspension were replaced with coils. Streamlining was improved with a smaller air intake at the front and a longer tail section with a smaller fin. A bubble canopy was added to the cockpit to avoid a repeat of the rag and goggles incident, and the braking systems were uprated. Finally, larger air intakes for the superchargers were added to increase engine performance. Thunderbolt now weighed in at 6 tons, nearly a ton lighter than the previous year. Eyston was back at Bonneville at the end of June 1938, although the salt flats were still flooded. Aware of the new threat to his record from John Cobb, Eyston aimed to be ready as soon as conditions would allow. On August the 24th, the salt was ready and Eyston ran Thunderbolt through the mile at 347 miles per hour. The return run felt even better, but this time Thunderbolt's shiny aluminium skin failed to trigger the timing beams and the run went unrecorded. Dull black patches were painted on either side of the car to prevent it happening again. On August the 27th, Eyston made another attempt on the record, and this time there were no timing issues. Thunderbolt's average through the mile was a new world land speed record of 345.21 miles per hour. Eyston could see that John Cobb, newly arrived at Bonneville with the Railton Special, posed a significant and immediate threat to his record. While Cobb tested his car, Eyston made further radical modifications, possibly inspired by the design of Cobb's Railton. Thunderbolt's tail fin was removed to reduce drag, and using a water tank instead of a radiator at the front meant that the air intake could be closed off and the nose given a new, rounded profile. After an unsuccessful attempt when he just failed to beat Eyston, Cobb raised the record on September the 15th to 350.2 miles per hour. Eyston wasted no time in responding, and at dawn the next day, Thunderbolt was push-started off the line with a pickup, and Eyston accelerated the 5 miles towards the timing beams. As Thunderbolt had enough power to spin the rear wheels at 300 miles per hour, care was needed. Eyston recorded 356 miles per hour through the mile and turned Thunderbolt around for the required return run within the hour. The resulting average of 357.5 miles per hour meant that just 24 hours after Cobb had claimed his record, Eyston was once again, officially, the fastest man on Earth. Thunderbolt never ran again. In April 1939 it was exhibited at the World's Fair in New York. Before the car left England, the Rolls-Royce R engines were removed and replaced with replicas made out of scrap parts, as was the giant gearbox. From New York, Thunderbolt was shipped to New Zealand for the Centennial exhibition that opened on November the 8th, 1939. In the meantime, Cobb had broken Eyston's 1938 record with a speed of nearly 370 miles per hour, just 1 week before the start of the Second World War. The war delayed Thunderbolt's return to England, and it was stored in a warehouse at the exhibition site. Meanwhile, bales of wool were stored in the same building, gradually burying Thunderbolt and the crate it was stored in. Early in the morning of September the 25th, 1946, fire swept through the building, fueled by the tarred roof and the 27,000 bales of wool inside. Thunderbolt, along with several aircraft and other vehicles, was destroyed. The cars burned remains laid by the roadside in Wellington until the early 1950s, when they were finally cut up and dumped in the local landfill during the construction of a new airport. Thunderbolt's engines still survive today. R25 is in the RAF Museum, Hendon in North London. R27 is on display in the Science Museum in London, next to the record-breaking seaplane it had powered before Thunderbolt. The great gearbox that was at the heart of Eyston's car disappeared after it was removed. It may have been used subsequently in a boat, but sadly, no records exist. George Eyston, OBE, innovator, engineer and record breaker, never attempted the land speed record again. As competitions manager with Castrol, he assisted his friend and rival John Cobb in his attempt on the water speed record, and he continued his involvement with MG as they competed for speed records. A well-loved character in British motorsport, Eyston died on June the 11th, 1979, aged 82. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and check out Scarf and Goggles for more tales of record breaking. Until next time.